LiSTNR production.
Hey, Bension Siebert here with The Briefing. Just a note that we'll be discussing child sexual abuse and mental health in today's episode, so if that's not for you, feel free to skip this one and catch up on anything else you might have missed in our feed. A new documentary exposing the dark underbelly of kids' television in the 90s and early 2000s is dropping in Australia today, more than 2 weeks after its first release overseas. It's called Quiet on Set, and it details shocking accusations of what it was like for child stars working on some of the biggest Nickelodeon shows on TV when many of us were growing up. The allegations surround one of Nickelodeon's most prized producers and screenwriters, Dan Schneider. He's behind some of the network's most popular and iconic shows. Think The Amanda Show, iCarly, Drake and Josh, and Zoe 101. Shows that had a massive fan base and made both him and Nickelodeon a lot of money. There has been a steady stream of accusations since he left the network in 2018, from creating toxic work environments on set to racism to inappropriate behaviour towards kids. But now it's all been gathered together for the world to watch on Quiet on Set. Listeners Justin Hill, entertainment reporter and host of the streaming service, joined The Briefing's Sacha Barbour-Gatt to take us through the revelations in the documentary and why it's already received so much attention worldwide.
Justin, thanks so much for joining us on The Briefing today. How and why has Quiet on Set been so explosive?
You know what? I'll tell you from a personal perspective. If you were a kid like me who grew up in the 90s and the early 2000s watching Nickelodeon, this is like taking that era that you probably look back on quite fondly, you know, when you were watching shows like The Amanda Show, Drake and Josh, all that, and just scrunching it up in a ball and throwing it in the bin. Because I think probably what a lot of people were aware of was happening in the industry, but some of what happened on those shows and in that era is very, very dark. And so I think a lot of people are seeing this and they're going, oh, it's such an era that I look back on with like a hazy glow all over it. And now for a lot of people, it will be forever tainted.
Let's talk about what some of the biggest accusations have been to come out of the documentary.
Yeah, so primarily it's two. So you've got producer, writer extraordinaire and Nickelodeon's golden child, Dan Schneider. He was like the untouchable man at Nickelodeon for so long. He is the guy behind some of those shows that I named. So, you know, he started with all that and then he moved on to there's Zoe 101 and iCarly. And he had this very particular way of creating, I guess you'd say like a childlike humour, but given that he was an adult. So you've got a lot of accusations around him and then you actually have some really dark stuff that involves Drake Bell and how he has come forward and said that he was actually the child that was unnamed in a child molestation case that happened during that era as well. So the accusations against Dan were things that were, I mean, these days we just are horrified by them. There was a situation where two women were splitting a single wage of a job and they were basically told, if you want this job, you will both need to do it, but you'll need to split the wage. There was a lot of discrimination accusations. There was a lot of I guess what you would expect to see in a room full of grown men making TV that is teenage humour. Then you've got the stories about what actually went to screen. And a lot of these videos have become viral and they star people like Ariana Grande, huge names, Miranda Cosgrove. And when we look back on that content now and we see them doing stuff like Ariana Grande trying to milk a potato.
Yeah.
And you might think, oh, that's just being silly, that's just childlike humour. But when you watch it and you see what it was that these kids were being made to do, it's highly inappropriate. And then you've got these accusations of Brian Peck, who was actually accused in 2004 of child molestation and he pleaded no contest. The situation with that is that he was convicted, he went to jail for 16 months. And at the time, the minor who was involved was obviously not named, and here we are 20 years later, and that person has come forward as Drake Bell, who was a massive Nickelodeon star. He started on The Amanda Show. He had his own show. And this is the scary part about this documentary is that something that comes up continually is that these kids and their parents were saying that they were being dangled this dream job. And as someone who is going for that dream job as well, I can really relate to, you will do whatever it takes. You will work the long hours. You will take the less pay. You will do it for free. And in this instance, I guess that innocence and that generosity of the parents and that understanding was taken advantage of by a child predator. It's very emotional to watch. He tells his story about what happened to him and about, sadly, how he felt really not supported by a lot of people in the industry and hasn't really spoken about it until now, which is, it's kind of scary.
Yeah, so why do you think these former child stars are all breaking their silence now?
For him, he had a lot of issues, probably more recently, where he had some run-ins with the law. And I think that for him was a catalyst. But I think what's happened is it's a combination of time, of a lot of therapy and a grieving period. And basically, a lot of these people have gone through that. And then all it's taken is for one person, and Drake explained this in a YouTube live stream that he did afterwards, where he was like, he'd been approached over the years where people were kind of like, he said one in particular where one person basically went back to him when he said no, and they said to him, "You're the problem. You're the problem, and this is why, things keep happening because you won't speak about it." And he's like, this was the most traumatizing thing that's ever happened to me. And he's like, I couldn't believe the email that I was reading. But he said the way that this one was approached is that he became friends with the TV show maker first, and they discussed it. And he wasn't pushed into give us all of the details and tell us what happened. And what it's done is when one person starts to talk, other people feel like they can speak up, because this is how it connects to Dan Schneider, is that they were scared of him. They were scared to say the wrong thing. They were scared to lose their jobs. They were scared of never working in the TV industry again because, according to them, he threatened them with that.
I want to talk a bit more about Dan Schneider, and you kind of touched on it, but what were some of the main accusations kind of leveled against him, and is he facing any sort of criminal repercussions for them?
For someone who's been around for such a long time, you can tell that he is very much like in the PR spin of everything. So the first thing he did was he did an apology video, and he did it with a former actor who was on one of his shows. So you almost feel like straight away there's a bias there. He said all the right things and has been very heavily criticised by a lot of people online for saying it was wrong, I'm embarrassed, I should have never acted that way. He also sort of says that he, was never involved in any gender discussions when it came to work or salary discussions either. So he has shut down some things. He's apologised for other things. Interestingly, Drake Bell does actually say that Dan supported him when the allegations and the consequent court case came around, which was very interesting. So Dan actually goes on to say that, in a court situation where you have character reference letters that are written. So a lot of people wrote them for Brian Peck, who was accused of child molestation. I think it was something like 41 letters, and they've actually been sealed for 20 years. And in this documentary, they open them up and read them. So two things there. Some of those letters were written by some very high profile people, including actor James Marsden. And it's stuff like, James saying he'd known him since he was, 14 years old himself, and that he didn't think that this was something that he would do. A lot of people have since come forward and said that they regret writing those letters for him because, obviously he was found guilty. It was no contest, so he didn't even argue some of the points, but they said they were given misinformation. When it comes to Dan, he actually says in his apology video that he helped Drake's mum write her letter. And he never wrote a letter for the accused either. So he's saying he was always on Drake's side.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that, because can we expect any further fallout from this documentary?
Well, interestingly, so it's a 4-part documentary. It's about 40 minutes each episode. I probably wouldn't recommend sitting down watching it all in one go. It's a very heavy topic to listen to from all elements, from Drake's story to the women that were involved to what was going on in that writer's room. Amanda Bynes, looking at her story, they sort of touch on that. But very interestingly, there's actually one more episode coming out.
Oh.
So we've got the 4, and on April 7, there will be another episode. And from what I can see, this is additional people who have decided to now come forward. So that's what I'm saying about having that one person speak and then another person speaks. And since then, we have had other Nickelodeon stars talk out about it as well.
Yeah.
It's suspected that we'll get to hear from more high-profile people who also have stories that they can add to this story as well.
Yeah. You've mentioned that it's really a really heavy watch. Do you think it's worth watching?
I think so, because no matter what industry you're working in, whether it is the entertainment industry or, whatever it is that you do, I definitely feel like if you have that drive and that aggressive drive to get what you want, it's just fascinating to see it from another person's perspective. And what broke my heart particularly was seeing 13 and 14-year-old children dealing with rejection. And, these kids have come onto these shows and they call them their families. Like, they've built a family and they've been on it for 6 years. And then their parents, would be like, oh, I was just doing everything that I could. And you see the parents going through this, like, I didn't want to say anything, but then, I wanted my child to be happy. And then you hear them go through this process of like, oh, they haven't been invited back. And it's soul destroying. And you can see as adults, they're not over it. Like, it's had a really detrimental effect to who they are as a person. And a lot of them have suffered with substance abuse and, just not being able to get their lives back together because this crazy roller coaster that they went on so early on in their life.
I think it's probably another nail in the coffin for the argument for child stars in general. From what you've talked about, I'm seeing a lot of it on TikTok at the moment. As you said, a heavy watch, but worth watching. Justin Hill, thanks for your time.
Pleasure.
Justin Hill there, speaking with The Briefing's Sacha Barbour-Gatt. That's it for The Briefing today, but we're back in your feed across the weekend. Tomorrow, you'll hear from Antoinette Lattouf, who returns for the weekend briefing. What have you got for us, Ant?
Hey guys, I have a hilarious but at times gut-wrenching chat with comedian and RuPaul Drag Race judge Rhys Nicholson this week. Rhys believes they have a very, very muggable face, and we unpack the multiple times Rhys has been mugged and also explore whether it's true that redheads have more fun. So yes, this chat is pretty fabulous, pretty funny, but it also gets deep because Rhys Nicholson talks about what it's like living with chronic anxiety and also some of their concerns about the future of stand-up comedy.
And on Sunday, Tom Tilley sits down with YouTubers Boy Boy, otherwise known as Alex Apollinov and Alexa Vulovic. If you haven't heard of them, think Friendly Geordies meets The Chaser. And they've got a few fans with almost 1 million subscribers on YouTube. We hope you have a wonderful weekend. The weekday briefing team will be back in your feed on Monday morning with the first in our 4-part series on sex work in 2024. I'm Ben Sion Siebert. Catch you then.